Since you're on this channel, there's a good chance you like F1 and would never miss a race under any circumstance. But one thing I've noticed is that most F1 fans only like F1, and don't try out any other motorsport. Your motorsport has cars with a roof and 2 doors? Yeah, no thanks. To be honest, until only earlier this year, I also only watched F1 because I believe F1 is the pinnacle of motorsport with the best drivers, fastest cars, and most famous tracks in the world. But since then, I've decided to branch away from just F1, and today I'm going to share with you guys what other motorsports I watch and why I like them in an effort to try and expose more people to less popular series. Also, just to clarify, this video is personal in the sense that I'll only be talking about other motorsports that I watch in particular. So for example, apart from the annual Indy 500, I don't watch IndyCar, so I wouldn't include it in this video since I don't know enough about it to form a strong enough opinion. So with that being said, I want to jump straight away into none other than the WEC, or the World Endurance Championship. Unlike F1, the WEC is a multi-class championship where there are technically 4 different championships and individual races per event going on at the same time. The first type of cars are of course the prototypes, the insanely fast LMP1 cars, soon to be the LM hypercars from 2021, and the not quite as fast LMP2 cars. With the other type of car being the GTE cars, again split into 2, the GTE Pro class for more experienced drivers, and the GTE AM class for more up and coming amateur drivers. In a WEC race, these 4 classes battle it out amongst up to 60 other cars with 3 drivers each, for races lasting generally around 6 hours long, with there of course being one key anomaly. The 24 hours of Le Mans is undoubtedly the highlight of a WEC season, and in my opinion, without question, the best race of the motorsport year that I look forward to the most. Seeing the cars race through both night and day at the Circuit de la Sarthe for 24 hours straight is really a sight to behold and always leads to some unbelievable moments. Most recently, the 2016 24 Hours of Le Mans was lost by the number 6 Toyota LMP1 car after breaking down with just 3 minutes of the 24 hours to spare. In general, the WEC is a fantastic spectacle to watch, with tons of action up front with the LMP1 cars and just as much action behind in the lower classes. Oh, and also I think it should go without saying, but the series also features many former F1 drivers such as Kamui Kobayashi and of course until recently Fernando Alonso. Now moving on to the WEC smaller counterpart, and you have ELMS, or the European Le Mans Series. Unlike the WEC, ELMS doesn't feature the ridiculous LMP1 cars, with the top category instead being LMP2 cars, now followed by an even slower LMP3 class, and again followed by the same GTE class from before, which is only the slightest bit confusing. Anyway, everything I said about the WEC can also be applied to ELMS. It's incredible seeing 3 different races happening at the same time, with action and drama every step of the way. Also, despite ELMS basically being a lesser version of the WEC, similar to what Formula 2 is to Formula 1, it does feature a couple of unique tracks not touched by the WEC, most notably Portimao and Paul Ricard. And sticking with Paul Ricard for a second, I think it's important to make clear that just because F1 is boring at Paul Ricard doesn't mean every other motorsport is too. It just means Paul Ricard's track layout simply doesn't suit F1 cars. Case in point, the 2 ELMS races at Paul Ricard this year have both been really entertaining, and keep in mind, the track layout in this series does not feature the chicane on the back straight used in F1, which is where most overtakes in F1 would occur. But anyway, now moving on from prototype racing of the WEC and ELMS, and let's talk GT racing, specifically the GT World Challenge Europe. Unlike the last 2, GT World Challenge cars are all under the same class, GT3, which are basically road-going performance cars transformed into race cars within the regulations. This leads to a pretty varied grid of Porsche, Lamborghini, Ferrari, Mercedes, McLarens, and even some lesser known surprises like the Lexus RCF GT3 car. The cars are in general pretty equal in performance, and this leads to some great racing at some of the most prestigious tracks in the world like Monza, Spa and Silverstone. And also similar to the last 2, GT World Challenge also has 2 drivers per car to get them towards the end of the race. The racing in this series never fails to be close wheel-to-wheel action from start to finish, and always keeps you at the edge of your seat with drama throughout every second of every race. In the GT World Challenge Europe this year at least, there are 8 rounds on the calendar, split into 2 different types. The first being the 4 sprint rounds, which are generally much shorter individual races at about an hour or 2 each. with this year's sprint rounds being at Misano, Manicourt, Zandvoort and Barcelona, and the second type being the much longer 4 endurance rounds, ranging from about 3 hours long to the season's main attraction, the 24 hours of Spa. Speaking of which, if you're watching this as it's uploaded, this year's 24 hours of Spa is probably still live right now, so why don't you give it a watch if you're feeling up for it. Anyway, now moving on from the GT World Challenge, but sticking with the GT aspect, and I want to talk about Super GT. Super GT is the Japanese National GT Championship, split into 2 different classes, racing around some of East Asia's most famous tracks like Shanghai, Suzuka and of course Fuji. The 2 classes in Super GT are the faster GT500 cars, which in the 2020 season only comprise of 3 different cars, being the Nissan GTR, Honda NSX and Toyota Supra, and the slower GT300 class, which is further broken down into 3 more, but that's a story for another day. All you need to know is that there's a ton of flexibility in GT300, leading to easily the most varied GT grid probably in the entire world. GT300 has everything from typical Lamborghini, Mercedes and Ferrari GT3 cars to more surprising entrances such as a Toyota GT86, Lotus Evora, and of course most famously of all, the APR Toyota Prius. Anyway, everything I said about the GT World Challenge still applies to Super GT, and even a bit more. Of course, unlike GT World Challenge, this is a multi-class championship, effectively giving us double the action and double the drama. The series is also home to many familiar faces like Heikki Kovalainen, and most obviously 2009 F1 champion Jenson Button, taking the Super GT title for Team Koremitsu last year. And now finally, moving on from one national GT championship to another, and we come to none other than British GT. Pretty identical in concept to Super GT, but of course being the UK, everything is slower. Like Super GT, British GT is a national GT championship again with 2 different classes, this time GT3 and GT4 cars, with the GT3 cars being the exact same class as the ones raced in GT World Challenge. And GT4 cars are basically GT3 cars but slower with less aerodynamics and less horsepower to act as this series' slower class for more amateur drivers. The British GT calendar is comprised of tracks from up and down the UK, this year's calendar taking us to Alton Park, Brands Hatch, Donington, Snetterton and of course Silverstone. With the next and final race of the season this year being the Silverstone round, featuring a certain Jenson Button as a guest driver, so that'll certainly be interesting. Again, the mix of different cars on the grid is pretty varied, with the usual Mercedes, Audi and Lamborghini in GT3, alongside the Bentley Continental, Aston Martin Vantage and beautiful McLaren 720S. With an equally mixed GT4 grid featuring the likes of the modern Toyota Supra, BMW M4, McLaren 570 and my favourite, the GT4 Ford Mustang. Also, the concept of multi-class racing I think is a bit more exciting in British GT, just because of how a lot of the tracks make it quite a lot harder for the GT3 cars to lap the slower GT4 cars. In the WEC at Le Mans for instance, most slower cars get lapped on the long Mulsanne straight, because it's wide and, well, long, so horsepower alone can get the fast cars past slower cars without a challenge. But at the narrow bending tracks of British GT like Alton Park and Snetterton, the faster GT3 cars don't have this luxury and have to try much harder to make their way through the lap GT4 field, leading to some great entertainment. Now again, I know this video has been kind of repetitive. For each one, including this one, I've been saying the racing is always close, there's always action and drama, etc, etc. And that's because for all of them, it's really hard to express why these motorsports are exciting without stating the obvious, so the only way to know is if you check them out yourself. You could watch a single race of British GT for example and say I don't like this, but could also watch a single race of ELMS and say I love this. It's all incredibly subjective as to what appeals to you specifically, I feel, which makes it quite hard to give a proper recommendation. All in all though, these 5 motorsports are a great spectacle that I personally enjoy watching, and needless to say, I recommend you give these a shot away from F1, and if you don't like it, that's of course completely fine. But anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to subscribe, comment, share, and I'll be back in the next video. See ya!